All right, what's going on, everyone? So the Iran ceasefire appears to be falling apart. I mean, we can call it whatever we want, but they're shooting at us, we're shooting at them, and they're shooting at their Gulf neighbors. So, not very ceasefire-y to me. Just overnight, the United States carried out a number of strikes inside of Iran and against Iranian vessels trying to bypass the U.S. blockade. In response, Iran launched a coordinated attack against 3 U.S. destroyers transiting the Strait of Hormuz. So to get started here, let's pull up a map to give you an idea of the area we're talking about, and we'll get into these conflicting statements. So we're going to look at both the U.S. and the Iranian accounts of what played out over the last 24 hours. So zooming in here on live UA map, we've got Iran on the top part of the screen, Persian Gulf here on the left, Strait of Hormuz, this checkpoint, this little curved check, or this little choke point, here. And this is where a number of U.S. strikes, it looks like a couple different engagements, took place in this area here. So starting out with U.S. Central Command, they said Iranian forces launched multiple missiles, drones, and small boats as the USS Truxtun, USS Rafael Peralta, and USS Mason transited the International Sea Passage, adding that no U.S. assets were struck. They said U.S. Central Command eliminated inbound threats and targeted Iranian military facilities responsible for attacking U.S. forces that included missile and drone launch sites, command and control locations, and intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance nodes. So a wide range of targets apparently struck last night. We do understand at this point that a number of fast attack boats were engaged by the U.S. military as they approached the destroyers in this area. There's some FIRMS data today showing some fires still burning in the Strait of Hormuz, likely a result of that engagement. However, early last night or yesterday afternoon here in the United States, we started to get news that there were a number of strikes being carried out inside of Iranian territory. Bandar Abbas, Keshem, and then over here a bit further to the east, Kargan. So when we look on the map, kind of a little bit of a triangle here that Iran has been using to facilitate the flow or restrict the flow through the Strait of Hormuz. U.S. airstrikes were not limited to just the boats that were trying to hit the U.S. destroyers. We went after, as CENTCOM says, drone and missile launch sites that can be a deep ways inside of Iranian territory, command and control locations, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance nodes. That opens it up well beyond just the coastline. But again, last night, a lot of the information we were getting was pretty significant U.S. strikes being carried out in this general vicinity here. President Trump added to this, saying, quote, 3 first-class American destroyers have now, with great success, crossed the Strait of Hormuz under fire. No damage was caused to the 3 destroyers, but very heavy damage was inflicted on the Iranian attackers. And just as we knocked them out today, we'll knock them out a lot harder and a lot more violently in the future if they don't get a deal signed fast. There's no indications, nothing new right now to suggest that a deal is imminent. We're kind of in the same place that we've been since the start of the ceasefire, arguably even before that, where there's the occasional leak that something is close and then it doesn't materialize. So, fingers crossed we're getting somewhere, but there's no hard evidence to support that we actually are making any progress. Now, turning to the Iranian assessment of what played out last night. So the U.S. is saying this is an international passageway. Iran cannot control this, cannot deny passage, so we are forcing the strait. All right, we're sending destroyers through to show, freedom of navigation, essentially. The Iranian perception here is that the United States violated the ceasefire by opening fire on Iranian vessels. In turn, the Iranian Navy, the IRGC Navy, returned fire in self-defense, just to give you an idea of the two competing narratives. So the IRGC Navy Command said, quote, following the violation of the ceasefire and the aggression of the terrorist U.S. military against an Iranian oil tanker, and as destroyers of the terrorist U.S. military approached the Strait of Hormuz, a very large-scale and precise combined operation was carried out. They said IRGC naval forces opened fire on the enemy destroyers using various types of anti-ship ballistic and cruise missiles, as well as destructive drones equipped with high explosive warheads. Intelligence monitoring indicates considerable damage to the American enemy, and 3 invading enemy warships quickly fled the Strait of Hormuz area. There's no indication at this point that we have no evidence that U.S. ships were hit. Again, right now we have Iran saying considerable damage done to the U.S. vessels, and the U.S. saying not one munition got through to actually strike the ships. So, again, I feel like that's a big claim, saying the destroyer suffered critical damage. We would need to see some evidence to support that, and we don't have that quite yet. I do want to note that the IRGC mentioned that they were using destructive drones equipped with high explosive warheads. Those sound like the Magura unmanned surface vessels, the type of thing that, that's the Ukrainian version but the unmanned surface vessels equipped with significant payloads, we know that Iran has some of those. The Houthis have some of those. We haven't really seen a lot of them used so far, to my understanding. It would be notable if they tried to carry out an attack using those unmanned surface vessels last night against the U.S. Navy. Now, the closest thing we have to a battle damage assessment here was reported on Mer News. So this is an Iranian regime-affiliated news outlet saying that there were a number of Iranian casualties last night. They said, quote, during the Americans' aggressive actions last night in the waters of the Strait of Hormuz, a cargo vessel near the waters of Manab was struck and caught fire. 10 injured sailors have been transferred to a hospital, and local groups and search teams are trying to learn the fate of the other 5 sailors. So, sailors, they're being kind of vague there, talking about a cargo vessel, suggesting that what the United States hit was a commercial vessel and not the IRGC Navy. Now, the Iranian Foreign Minister Araghchi, in responding to all of this, said, quote, every time a diplomatic solution is on the table, the U.S. opts for a reckless military adventure. Now, it really just seemed like it was a matter of time before the bullets started flying again here. We saw just a couple days ago when the United States announced Project Freedom. We were going to be escorting or facilitating the flow of commercial vessels from the Persian Gulf out of the Strait of Hormuz. And as soon as we announced that and started to carry that out, and we did push a couple destroyers through with 2 U.S.-flagged vessels, Iran immediately started launching attacks throughout the region, really focused heavily on the UAE. And one of the areas they hit was out here on the east, the Fujairah oil facility. Very significant location here that it's on the east side of the Strait of Hormuz, so vessels needing to fill up and get oil can fill up here without having to go through the strait. It's pretty significant when Iran has pretty significant control and locked down a lot of this portion here. So we saw that kick off, and it just seemed like a matter of time before the United States responded militarily. The initial response was that this is well underneath the threshold of the returning to hostilities, under the threshold of a violation of the ceasefire. That appears to have upset at least Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and probably the United Arab Emirates. So it did feel like it was just a matter of time before the U.S. picked up strikes. And it was not just last night in this specific area. Earlier today, we got some new footage showing that the United States carried out strikes against a number, 2, 3 in the last 2 days, but 2 vessels earlier today, struck by a U.S. FA-18 Super Hornet. So this is coming from U.S. Central Command. They say U.S. forces disabled the MT Sea Star 3 and MT Sevda on May 8th prior to both vessels entering an Iranian port in the Gulf of Oman in violation of the ongoing U.S. blockade. They say a U.S. Navy FA-18 Super Hornet from the USS George H.W. Bush disabled both tankers after firing precision munitions into their smokestacks, preventing the non-compliant ships from entering Iran. They say U.S. forces also disabled Iranian-flagged MT Hasna on May 6th as it attempted to sail to an Iranian port in the Gulf of Oman. An FA-18 Super Hornet from the Abraham Lincoln disabled the unladen oil tanker's rudder by firing several rounds from a 20-millimeter cannon. All 3 vessels are no longer transiting to Iran. So the U.S. is still enforcing and holding up the blockade of Iranian ports. That's still very much in effect, but we have seen a noticeable increase in the aggressive monitoring of that, right? I think we had one instance in the last couple weeks of the U.S. firing rounds into the engine room of one vessel, and then all of a sudden we blink and we've got aircraft striking Iranian ships. Now, we also today have Iran continuing their attacks. So just a few moments ago, we got verification from the United Arab Emirates that they have already engaged 2 missiles and 3 UAVs launched from Iran today. Now, the big thing last night, Jen Griffin over at Fox News was the first to report this, and she had an administration official saying that this is not a restarting of the war and this is not an end of the ceasefire. I feel like we're just playing with words at this point, right? Isn't this the whole, it's not a war, it's a special military operation for Russia, right? Or it's not a war, it's a little excursion. It's that same type of thing. Like when the 2 sides are shooting at each other, I don't know how you call that a ceasefire. So it's notable in this case that, Iran does not view this as not in violation of the ceasefire. Iran views it very much as the ceasefire is no longer in place, and it looks like they might be taking that to heart as they carried out additional attacks against the United Arab Emirates earlier today. And then a phrase that I wanted to share with you guys here that I think helps provide context when trying to keep track of this war was published in a piece by Thomas Wright in The Atlantic a couple days ago. Wright served on the National Security Council under President Biden, and he said Iran and the United States have failed to come to an agreement, not because hardliners are blocking pragmatists inside of Iran, but because both sides seem to sincerely believe that they have won the war. And whether you agree with that perception or not, I think that's important to keep back in mind when you see statements or actions carried out by the United States or Iran right now. View it through the lens of if they view that they have the upper hand. So especially helpful when looking at Iranian actions, I think. If we look at Iranian statements, if we look at Iranian actions, Iranian kind of posturing towards these negotiations and the possibility of returning to military operations, if they view that they are either winning the war, have won the war, I think is a bit of a stretch, or at least have a path to victory, I think it helps explain their position a little bit more. Again, agree with that or disagree with that, I think it does help to get an idea of where the Iranian regime is coming from as it relates to these ongoing negotiations. That's all we got for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.